right, we're going to get the panel started in about 30 seconds to give our attendees the opportunity to join. So please bear with us. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the upcoming missions live Q&A panel at the 2021 CubeSat Developers Workshop. We're excited to have our panelists and attendees join us for an engaging discussion about their presentations. Before we begin, however, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this panel, Xperia Laboratories. Our sponsors are really what make this entire, make it possible for us to put this conference on free of charge for all the attendees. So let's take a quick look at the Xperia Laboratories. All right, thanks again to Xperia Laboratories for sponsoring this panel. More information about Xperia Laboratories can be found in the chat once the session gets started. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for the upcoming missions live Q&A panel, Dr. Pauline Four. Dr. Pauline Four is the director of the Cal Poly CubeSat Laboratory and an assistant professor in the Aerospace Engineering Department. Dr. Four has been developing and managing international small satellite projects for the last decade, putting emphasis on applying systems engineering and good practices to the small satellite programs. All right, take it away, Dr. Four.
Thank you, John, for the introduction, and welcome everybody. And thank you to our panelists for joining that panel on upcoming missions. As it was put into the chat, a little bit of logistics. If you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. All right, without further ado, I'm going to start, and we're going to have a brief introduction from each of the panelists with some questions, and then we'll open the floor for all the questions. I'm going to start with the order I had on the website. So I'm going to start with Ben Malphrus. So Ben, if you'd like to please introduce yourself and provide a short description of your presentation to the audience.
Absolutely. Well, I'm Ben Malphrus, and I'm the director of the Space Science Center at Morehead State University, which is a medium-sized university in Eastern Kentucky. We were an early adopter of the CubeSat form factor. We've flown, I guess, 7 missions to date. We are also the home of what will become NASA's Deep Space Station 17, an affiliated node on the DSN, a 21-meter ground station. And my presentation today was on our flagship mission, which is the Lunar IceCube mission. It's a NASA mission, but it's led by Morehead State and its partners, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and it's on the Artemis 1 mission, which will orbit the moon and map the distribution of water ice and other volatiles. So it's a science and a tech demo mission. Looking forward to it launching in November.
Likewise. Thank you, Ben, for the introduction. My first question to you is, so in your presentation, you were emphasizing about assembly integration testing. And I was wondering if you had any recommendations or any lessons learned from your experience of now developing an interplanetary CubeSat versus developing a LEO CubeSat on the strategy for assembly integration and testing.
So, oh boy, that's a great question. We learned a lot about the differences between interplanetary and LEO missions. Many things just don't scale for interplanetary missions. A lot of things like flight software, navigation trajectories, propulsion systems, complex attitude control systems, they are just about as complex for CubeSat systems headed to interplanetary space as they are for LEO missions. And so we significantly underestimated the time that it takes, particularly with respect to AIT, in terms of the testing aspects for the interplanetary environment. The constraints, I'll just give you one example, the constraints on attitude control, for example, which need to be tested, you know, at least in a closed loop environment. Maybe if you don't have a huge Helmholtz coil that can be driven, you can at least test the modes. But we had so many constraints. The propulsion system radiator couldn't be pointed ever toward the sun. The star tracker can't be pointed toward the moon or the sun. The radiators have constraints for orientation because of their thermal properties. The solar rays have to be pointed toward the sun. If you're in a comm session or ranging, which is another driving requirement that's very different, your antennas have to be pointed toward the, more or less toward the Earth vector. And then there's the science instrument, which has to be lunarnator pointed for its science mission and anti-lunarnator pointed for calibration. So there's this crazy choreography of attitude control that was extraordinarily much more complex than it was for LEO missions. And testing those attitude modes, modeling and then testing the attitude modes, I think we significantly underestimated. So that's probably one takeaway is plan lots of time and get lots of help for testing attitude modes for interplanetary.
It also sounds like a concept of operation, early thinking about the concept of operation and the orientation of the subsystem would be very critical.
Absolutely. The ConOps will help you constrain all those attitude models and help you really think through. But of course, you have to be adaptable as you go because things change when you get through thermal balance testing, for example. Things might be worse or they might not be as bad as you thought, or both. In our case, it was really both. So yeah, you have to be adaptable. You have but I think it's an excellent point to have a highly developed ConOps and then go through as much testing as you possibly can and then iterate those control algorithms. So I think it's an excellent point and good advice.
Well, thank you very much for providing your insights on it. All right, our next up is Elwood Agasid. So Elwood, if you don't mind introducing yourself and your presentation, please.
Great, thanks, Pauline. Yeah, my name is Elwood Agasid. I'm the Deputy Program Manager for NASA's Small Spacecraft Technology Program. And today I'll be presenting the Capstone mission, Capstone standing for Cislunar Autonomous Positioning System Technology Operations and Navigation Experiment. So it'll be one of the first NASA CubeSats to basically go into the near rectilinear halo orbit. So we'll be demonstrating the flight and entry and approach into that particular orbit. That will be the orbit that will be used by the Artemis program lunar platform, orbital platform. And so we'll be demonstrating, the arrival and insertion into that orbit, as well as we'll be doing a cross-link experiment between the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter and the Capstone spacecraft to start testing autonomous navigation software as well. And so we're projected to launch at the end of about October. We have no earlier than date of 9/23/21, but it's looking like we're probably going to launch sometime in October.
Right. Another launch to look forward on our calendars.
Yep.
Especially for you.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been, one of the things that became interesting is we awarded this contract back last year. And one of the goals was to get this completed in about 18 months. Well, we've kind of exceeded that, but by and large, we've met our goals for, trying to get a mission into space in less than 2 years. And the other thing that becomes interesting with this, it'll be the first 12U that will launch into cislunar space. And then we're also going to be utilizing the newer version of the Rocket Lab Electron rocket as well, that has their photon stage, enhanced photon stage that features their hyper Curie motor. And in the presentation, we'll talk about that.
My first question to you is, so you're mentioning the launch is around September, and then the Artemis 1 CubeSat missions are expected maybe a few months later. So I was wondering, how is the scheduling with the DSN going to be handled with those different missions? And do you have any impact on the Capstone mission on when you have maybe to do certain maneuvers to get into the near rectilinear orbit, or other aspect that you have to consider there?
Yeah, and that's a good question. As many of us, or some of us, are aware, the Deep Space Network is a highly scheduled and controlled network. And so planning is going to be really important on this. And every time, if we have launch delays, we have to go into a replanning phase with the Deep Space Network. So, like you just said, we're going to be just ahead of the Artemis launch. And so timing is going to be everything. So anytime we have an update, especially with our trajectories and the navigation portion of this, we have to basically contact the folks in the Deep Space Network and tell them, here, this is our launch date, and here's our planned trajectory. So it's very tightly organized, so that that Deep Space Network can keep track of all the spacecraft, their existing missions, as well as all the planned missions that are coming up. So they're going to be really busy. And one of the reasons that Ben was brought on board is to support some of the, especially the CubeSat portion of it. So it was very timely for, Morehead to enable that dish, and then we'll be using that as well as for part of our mission as well.
Thank you. Another question I have for you is that upon Capstone demonstration of the cislunar autonomous positioning and navigation, is there a plan to then develop some kind of standard, maybe with international collaborators for future users or developers of moon assets? To have, just like we have a GPS on Earth, but to develop like a moon GPS, I guess, in a sense.
And that's one of the reasons that we're doing the CAPS experiment, because basically what that's going to mimic is that the spacecraft will act like another ground station, but in space, right? The capstone. And so that we're not going to rely heavily on ground assets for navigation. And so the thought, or our desire anyway, is to extend that mission to further mature the autonomous navigation software, and then look for opportunities to infuse that into other demonstration missions. So there's going to be a lot of development in after this mission, obviously from lessons learned, but for how we can use a basically distributed spacecraft for position, navigation, and timing applications, right? So that, when we get to the, we'd like to be able to have less reliance on ground assets and more capabilities, for remote sensing and remote navigation.
Thank you very much, Elwood. I will be moving on to our next panelist, Austin Thomas. So Austin, if you'd like to please introduce yourself and briefly introduce your presentation.
All right, hello everyone. Like I said, my name is Austin Thomas. I'm a graduate student at Western Michigan University in the Aerospace Engineering program. I'm the subsystem lead for the propulsion and education public outreach of the SwarmX mission. Our presentation is about the education and public outreach efforts of the SwarmX mission, whose mission is to, we are utilizing 3 identical CubeSats to make space weather measurements.
Thank you, Austin. My first quick question to you is about the surveys. I was wondering what was your plan to deploy them, if you were going to maybe ask them throughout the curriculum or like throughout the student experience throughout the project, or is it more like a one-time thing, or like, yeah, what is your overall plan with the surveys?
So we have 4 separate surveys: demographic, entry, annual, and exit. So yeah, as a student, as part of the SwarmX mission, they will take the entry survey when they come in along with the demographic survey, and say if they're part of it for an entire year or 2 years, they'll take the annual survey as they go, seeing what skills they develop and they have brought in and what they came out with the exit survey. We're deploying the surveys using Western software Qualtrics, which allows us to distribute them by email to our students or by a link to where they can go, just click the link and take the surveys, and that data will be sent back to us.
All right, thank you. And my next question is, as you already know, when we do a CubeSat or even a spacecraft in general, we always have a worry about the interfaces between the different elements of that spacecraft. But here with the SwarmX, you are kind of adding that dimension with working with this multi-university system. So I was wondering if you had any tips and tricks of a programmatic standpoint and maybe logistic standpoint on organizing that multi-university effort, especially from that mentorship aspect.
And look at the mentorship aspect. So we have 6 different universities, 3 of them with more experience and 3 newer programs. We have, from my perspective, as working on the propulsion subsystem, Western Maine University's mentor would be Georgia Tech. They provide us with a lot of oversight and how to go about a lot of issues. So having them help us gives a lot of logistics issues solved. And the same with some of the other universities. They have other people, other universities to help them that have more experience. And then we all, every week or bi-weekly, we meet with all 6 universities together. We go over what each university has accomplished or each subsystem has accomplished during that week. So we all kind of have an idea of what each subsystem is doing. And we use Slack to communicate with each other. We have each subsystem on there where we can contact either individuals, or we can post in the subsystem Slack channel to say it could be propulsion or GNC. If I have a question, which will directly reach out to them, and anyone from that subsystem can respond. So we have a lot of interaction going on where we're communicating very well.
Communication, that's the key of any project. Oftentimes very much underestimated. Thank you very much, Austin, for your insight. Our next panelist is Vahid Rastinasab. And so Vahid, if you'd like, please to introduce yourself and your presentation.
Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for inviting me for this CubeSat developer workshop. So my name is Vahid Rasti. I'm a PhD candidate at Beijing University of Technology in China. And I'm working on Traverse technology on the CubeSat. So currently I'm using this technology for interplanetary missions, such as the Mars, to detecting water on the Mars and Moon. And we are proposing actually a project for this kind of the trajectory mission. First going to Venus, inject some CubeSat, and then go to the Mars. And there are some kind of on the Mars, we have kind of the constellation. Okay, so briefly, I'm working on trials for the satellite, for CubeSat, and my proposal is about anticipating tropical cyclones by a CubeSat with the trials technology. So.
Thank you, Vahid. Sorry, go ahead. All right.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, my background is a little bit bad.
Okay. The back and forth of virtual, we have trouble not cutting each other off. All right. Thank you, Vahid, for the introduction. My first question to you is, well, you mentioned in your presentation that for terahertz waves, the signal is very much reduced as it travels through the atmosphere, and the strength is basically becomes null by the time it reaches the surface. So I was wondering what type of countermeasure you implemented in your radiometers to enable that observation or measurement of tropical cyclones.
So because we usually just monitor the clouds. So if you just look at the atmosphere, so this our losses is so low and so low, not too much losses. So if we just have used a strong antenna, traverse antenna, usually we use horn antenna. So and we just on the electric RF side, we just use some CMOS technology. There are some technology NASA used this. So we can kind of pass this mission. So it's kind of this like proposal. We are not still going too deep on this project. Yeah.
All right. As a follow-up, what is the overall status of your radiometer? Were you able to maybe have a prototype and do some analysis on it? Which stage are you at?
I am in the like conceptual design. I have some block diagram for the circuit and just find the size of antenna. And still I didn't simulate the antenna and any software. Just kind of propose a block diagram and the size of antenna. Yeah, this is step. Yeah, basic research, in fact.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Vahid, and thank you to all our.
Thanks for having me.
To all our panelists, of course, our pleasure. So that conclude our first round of introduction for our 4 panelists, and now the floor is open to the audience. And thank you for the panelists for typing away already in your question. Oh, I forgot I was on the wrong window to look at the question. All right, so we have a question for Ben Malphrus or Elwood Agasid. How would any potential delays in Artemis program affect your mission, if at all?
Well, I'll give a start. It's actually been delayed a number of times so far, and I think the biggest impact is that the trajectory has to be remodeled with every launch date. It impacts the celestial alignment, of course, between the sun, earth, and moon. And we're using a low thrust electric propulsion system, which relies on 3-body perturbation effects and manifold trajectories. And those are, trajectory models are very complicated. And so from one day to the next, you have to remodel those trajectories. And then, of course, that impacts the maneuvers. And the maneuvers also change the requirement for tracking time. So there is a sort of a, filtering down of effects for delays that are mostly related to trajectory modeling, propulsion in dynamics, and tracking. But we have sort of automated a lot of those processes and understand that, in the space business, there are always delays. So you try to automate those processes to the extent that you can. But yeah, there's a lot of work that has to be redone every time you have a launch delay.
Thank you, Ben. Elwood, would you like to add to it?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I think, from our perspective, we're almost in a race with the Artemis program, because one of the objectives of the capstone mission is to actually provide preliminary information for navigation and communication purposes to the Artemis program. So we're serving as a pathfinder for the Artemis program. We're working very close with the Lunar Operations Office so that they basically will get all our data from this particular mission, so they can use it as a learning experience and to prepare for mission operations, especially when the landers come into effect and the science operations begin.
All right, thank you, Elwood. Kind of relating to that, and a question I wanted to ask you, Ben, and then I forgot when it was when I was talking with you. But you mentioned in your presentation that the Lunar IceCube team kind of underestimated that coordination with the DSN. And would you mind expanding a little bit on that, in which aspects, and so what you have learned, and maybe what the community could benefit if they were planning or to have such a similar mission?
Yes, absolutely. It's an excellent question. We had flown LEO missions before, and coordinating with a LEO ground station, even a network like the Near Earth network, it has certainly challenges. But coordinating with the DSN is extremely challenging. For example, the ranging and Doppler requirements, the tracking requirements are really completely different. I mean, in LEO, you might use a GPS system, and you have fairly well-known ephemeris models, orbit models that you can model yourself in STK, and you can compare those to data that NORAD and others may collect. So you know your orbit pretty well. In interplanetary missions, it's much more difficult. So you know, in terms of providing the ranging data that your navigation and trajectories team needs to plot the course, if you will, it requires significant amount of radiometric data, both Doppler and range data. And that was something that we hadn't really done before. And so actually the testing that's required with the DSN to make sure that you have accounted for all the delays within the spacecraft, and that you have the right ranging modes enabled on your ranging transponder and your network over which you get the ranging data, how it flows, was much more complicated than we anticipated. And then just talking with the DSN in general from your mission mock, you know, we ended up being on the NASA mission backbone, but we have a little bit of a special case because of DSS-17. But all the testing that's required for the interfaces between the Mission Operations Center, the DSN stations, DSPOC, and all of the security clearances that are required in terms of, you know, accessing those servers were quite complicated. And the ground data system in general for an interplanetary mission that uses the DSN gets pretty complicated. I think the good news is that JPL and Goddard and other AIMS, other NASA centers have actually developed a lot of tools that they make available to the missions. And so you don't have to complete you don't have to start everything from scratch. Your command dictionaries and your tools for telemetry and ranging formats, it's all a lot of information and a lot of tools and tool chains are actually available to you. They have to be modified, but they're all out there. So I think in summary, the ground data system was much more complex for interplanetary to talk with the DSN for ranging and data flow. But there are tools out there, and the DSN team is extraordinarily experienced and extremely helpful. And in our case, they had to do a lot of hand holding, but they were willing to do that. So it's something we certainly underestimated. If a small university in the middle of nowhere can do it, though, lots of people can do it.
So you give a hope to the whole community right there.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Go for it.
Pauline, yeah, if I could just add on to what Ben has kind of described, I don't think people understand that when we fly these deep space missions, they're flown from the ground. People don't really understand that, right? And that's the reason that NASA is really interested in autonomous navigation technologies. That's why we're looking at X-ray nav and some of those other types of navigations technology, so that we don't have to rely so much on the ground network to fly the missions. And so like when Artemis goes, they're going to deploy 13 spacecraft. And if you can imagine 6 antennas trying to track all those, right? And our ground network is very limited, to be quite honest with you. And there's these existing missions that are going on. So when Ben's spacecraft gets kicked off, the Deep Space Network has to look at Orion, then the other 13 spacecraft simultaneously to track everybody. So you can imagine that people are going to be really, really busy on this and at this time. And so like I said, everything is tightly scheduled. And Ben, once he gets the information on where his spacecraft is, he's got to take command of it and steer it to where it needs to go. And that's the challenge for us all.
And then the back of it is we don't have time like for a power outage, right? This is the other aspect of the ground segment we tend to forget. We need to communicate with our spacecraft, but we also have to be careful of anything that could happen on the ground to not happen for these very critical moments. So thank you very, very much both for your comments. Austin, I have a quick question for you, kind of slightly changing the topic. Is you mentioned that you have these webinars and lectures. Is there a plan for those to become maybe publicly available as an overall outreach, and if you could just expand on those overall lectures and webinars you are giving between the teams?
So as of now, the webinars and the lectures, they're internal to the SwarmX members. We have talked about possibly expanding them to the public later. As of now, we're trying to keep them just to the SwarmX team members so we can get more cohesion, build cohesion amongst the team members, especially because we do have some turnaround with students graduating and going on, and we have new people coming in. So it is nice, though, that we are still considering that. We do not know as of now how broad we will take it, but we're going to keep it for now to just the members of SwarmX.
Okay, thank you very much, Austin. And so we have a question from the chat that I'm seeing Elwood already trying to type. So let's see if I can ask the question faster than you can type their answer. So the question is, can you talk a bit more on end-of-life maneuver that you're considering? And then as indicated, it's a spacecraft-to-spacecraft positioning system. Can this technology be used later for even on-surface navigation?
Yeah, let me answer that the second question first. Mostly because I know more about it than the first question. But the reality is once you have basically a timing, right, a reference spacecraft in the cislunar environment, you know, that has all the timing information and position information, then that can definitely be used as now on surface or lunar surface and navigation. And that's what they plan to do with the orbital platform. That will be established now for doing surface navigation for the lunar landers. And then I'm not sure what your about the question about the end of life, but one of the things that's required for the end of mission is that we dispose of the spacecraft to a safe place, right? Send it out further, or we're allowed to actually basically land it on the lunar surface. It's part of the planetary protection plan, and Ben might be able to actually talk about that requirement as well, because I don't know what your plans are for disposal for IceCube.
So that's, for me, maybe one of the coolest parts of the whole mission. But Elwood, it's an excellent question, because when I wrote the proposal, gosh, I guess 7 years ago now, you have to have a disposition plan. NASA requires that you, in LEO, it's pretty straightforward. You know, you typically burn up or go to a parking orbit if you're high enough. But what do you do when you're in orbit around the moon? And further, you're constrained by the amount of propulsion. We have 1.3 kilograms of propulsion, right? So you have two options, right? You could propel yourself into a heliocentric orbit out of the way of everybody and be there forever. Or your other option is to crash into the moon. And I thought, well, gosh, I did the math and we don't have nearly enough propulsion margin, propellant margin to achieve the delta V needed for a heliocentric orbit once we're in this low lunar orbit. So the only option was really to crash into the moon. And so I thought, man, I'll write it in the proposal, but NASA will never go for that in a million years, allow us to crash into the moon. And so I put it in the proposal because there were really no other options. And the reviewer said, yeah, we can see you don't really have any other options. And you can dispose of the spacecraft by crashing into the moon. But there are a couple of rules you got to follow. You have to, of course, follow the planetary protection guidelines and be approved for your planetary protection plan. And you have to crash into the far side because they were worried about the historical sites. The Apollo landing sites and Ranger landing sites are actually considered historical sites. And so we don't have a lot of control over the final trajectory. But I think we have enough control that we can at least crash into the far side. And so, you know, we worked through that plan with the NASA sponsors at Advanced Exploration Systems and the Planetary Protection Officer, the PPO. And I think we have a plan. In the end, I think I concluded that thank goodness we weren't flying to Mars, because, you know, the moon being a lifeless arid body, your planetary protection plan is a lot less stringent than it would be for Mars or even an asteroid. So yeah, in summary, we get to crash into the moon in the end and make a new crater.
Yeah, yeah, that was the same decision for us too.
Yeah. So if I could add to that story,
at the end of the mission, we had just enough fuel to basically crash into the moon. So I think we needed 5 meters per second or something like that, or delta V.
Yeah. So if I could just tell an entertaining story for under a minute here. My early career, sometimes in your career as an engineer or a scientist, your career comes full circle and you're vindicated. And I've actually been vindicated in this process, because my first 20 years I spent doing research in astrophysics. And as an early career scientist, my team and I discovered a previously unknown galaxy. And I thought, oh my gosh, we discovered a galaxy. I get to name it, because if you discover an asteroid, you get to name it after your spouse or your dog. I mean, there are asteroids, for goodness sake, named 2401 Mr. Spock, right? And so I thought, oh gosh, we get to name this galaxy, right? So, it turns out that the galaxies are all named after a catalog. So our galaxy is NGC 5291-B, right? So we didn't get to name it, which I'm not bitter, but it has 100 billion stars, each with hundreds of millions of asteroids. But, anyway, I'm not bitter about that. But here's the thing, circling back to the end of your career, all the craters on the moon have names. But what if you make a new crater? Yeah, see where I'm going with this?
Yes, the Malphrus crater. I was going to propose that to you when you said it, that you were crashing. We can have the Agasid and the Malphrus crater.
Yeah. So I think the point there is sometimes in your career, if you wait long enough, you're vindicated.
Well, now it's another reason to look forward for these new craters, in a sense. All right. Thank you all our panelists for joining. We're going to do a final round in case you have final words about whichever you like, maybe to raise awareness to the community or something you're looking forward in the next steps of your mission. So I'm going to start with you, Austin.
Well, one thing I would like to point about the Educating Public Outreach team of SwarmX is our Slack channel that was mentioned in the presentation. We always want to be inviting new people to our Slack channel where you can come and ask questions on any assortment of subsystem topics. So if someone would like to join our new Slack channel, you would reach out to Dr. Kristina Lemmer at kristina.lemmer@wmish.edu. I don't know what the best way to be to put that out there right now. I don't know if I can put that into chat.
You can put that into the chat. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. All right, that's what we'll do. But yeah, we are inviting everybody to come join new subsystems, new CubeSat teams can come join and ask questions to our experts. We have a variety of experts in a variety of fields, and then come get their questions answered directly by those experts in a more personal format.
All right, thank you, Austin. Vahid, any last words? Oh, I probably shouldn't say it that way.
Okay, so I wanted to say thank you for inviting us and you providing this valuable content. Actually, here I could learn many things about interplanetary missions, because it's for me it was very difficult to find some people they working especially on this. And today I could meet all of this. Okay, I can say they are big science in the world. And thanks to gather all of these people together. Okay, that's just all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Vahid. Elwood, any final comments?
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the mute button. I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to present the information and talk with folks. It's this venue or this format for the conference is new to me, and so, but I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. and to talk with my friends like Ben and others in the community who I have not physically seen for quite some time, at least for a year, certainly. But for those of you that are interested, please, go to the NASA SmallSat website to look at all our missions. We have a PTD-1 mission that's in space right now that's looking at the TUI water propulsion system. And then we're going to do another PTD-2 mission, hopefully in June or July and stuff. And so, we have a lot of missions kicking off this year from the Small Spacecraft Technology Program. So if you visit our website, please log on and we'll find out what we're up to and what technologies we're working on.
Thank you, Elwood. And then, any final comments from you?
It feels like a new era of space exploration. CubeSats are going to interplanetary space. We made history in 2018 with Marco, making it again with Capstone and the Artemis 1 missions. And it's not just NASA. I mean, the universities, corporations, international partners. It really is an extraordinary era in space exploration. And I encourage everybody to, dream your wildest dreams at this point with the new technologies that are available, propulsion systems, rad-hard components. You can make those dreams become a reality. So I hope everybody feels as excited as I am about the era of interplanetary small sat research. And I appreciate being a part of it and a part of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you all for being with us. My last comments will be, yes, remember, we need to work together, right? And this is right now a very wonderful era where commercial, government, and academia can really come together to achieve the next great steps. With that said, I will hand it over to John for the final closure of the panel.
That sounds good. Thank you, Pauline, and thank you everyone for joining the discussion, providing some great answers to the questions. I'd like to especially thank the panelists for leading such an exciting panel. This is going to conclude our upcoming Missions Live Q&A panel. I hope you'll join us in a short 15 minutes for our next live Q&A session. Thank you very much. Bye.